So I would just like to announce that the first appeal has been completed. And as a reminder, you will receive written response from the committee within 20 working days according to the regulations, and you are welcome to leave the meeting. All right. So now we're going to move on to our next appeal. And first and foremost, I'd like to know, do you want this in open session or in closed session? Open session, thank you. Okay. So at this time, I would like to introduce myself and the rest of the committee members. My name is Julie Allen. I'm the chair of the State Human Rights Committee. Welcome. And I'll ask Tim. If you could.
Tim Russell, State Committee Member, Region 5.
My name is SHRC. I'm a committee member.
Hello, I'm Monica Lucas, committee member representing Region 4, the Central Richmond area.
David?
This is David Bain. I am a committee member from far Southwest Virginia.
David Cora?
Hi, this is Cora Sweat. I am from the Northern Virginia area.
Cora? And then those other individuals in the room, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Tamika Goldman. I'm the State Human Rights Director.
Mary Claire O'Hara, Associate Director for Facility Operations.
I'm Clee Kinsey, the Secretary in the Office of Human Rights.
When it's green, it's on.
Aha, now it's on. Hi, I am Ren Fizuski. I am with the Disability Law Center. Disability Law Center. Karen Taylor, Office of the Attorney General Counsel for the committee. I'm Gail Burford from Western State Hospital.
And I'll ask the advocates online to introduce themselves. So Brandon.
Good morning, Brandon Rotenberry, Facility Advocate Manager.
Brandon and Ann.
Ann Pasco, Regional Manager, Region 2.
Thank you. So again, this, I think I got everyone online. Yeah. So this hearing will be open.
Everyone online? What about your people? We have 2 people online from Western State, Dr. Jason Stout and I believe Dr. Catherine Leslie.
Oh.
Other folks that are online, would you mind introducing yourself, please? I believe there's representation from Western State Hospital.
Sure. Dr. Jason Stout, Director of Psychology at Western State. I'm on the phone only.
Anyone else?
His last name?
Stout?
Stout.
Stout.
S-T-O-U-T. First name Jason.
Thank you.
They're kind of internet issues at Western State, which is why they're on.
Ms. Sawyer, we're moving on to another appeal. It is open, but you do not have to stay. Okay. All righty. So I would like to open by saying, I'd just like to open by saying that all of the SHRC members received a copy of the full record of the complaint to include the original LHRC petition, the LHRC findings, all exhibits provided, and statements from each party about the reason for or the disagreement with this appeal. Parties to the appeal will each be given 10 minutes for opening statements, followed by questions from the committee members. And Ren, you'll have the opportunity to go first when you're ready. Monica will be keeping time for us.
Excellent.
Thank you. Go ahead if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Thank you all for allowing us to present this petition to you today. Elizabeth is a 6-year-old woman with a developmental disability, serious mental illness, an extensive history of trauma, and severe arthritis for which she uses a rollator or walker. On December 9th of 2020, Western State staff placed Elizabeth in seclusion due to disruptive behavior. While in seclusion, they did not allow her to use a chair. Instead, she had to sit on her rollator. Elizabeth's guardian and sister submitted a complaint of abuse the next day, but did not receive a written disposition or information on appellate rights until April of this year. On behalf of Elizabeth and her guardian, Marion, the LCV appealed Western State's findings to the LHRC, who found that Western State did violate Elizabeth's rights through the improper use of seclusion and their failure to follow the human rights complaint process. Despite this finding, the LHRC failed to make a finding of abuse or neglect or violation of the patient's right to be provided services according to sound therapeutic practice. These are the two findings at issue in this appeal and why we're before you today. First, we will discuss the services portion. First, through the improper documentation of seclusion. The regulations make it very clear that providers are required to provide thorough and accurate documentation in a person's services record, and they have specific requirements regarding documenting seclusion episodes. Furthermore, Western State's own policy requires this documentation, including physician's orders, staff monitoring, and debriefing documentation, among others. Western State failed to include any of this required documentation for Elizabeth's seclusion episode. This failure to provide this documentation is a failure to provide services according to sound therapeutic practice, violating Western State's own policies as well as the regulations. Next, we'll discuss the improper documentation of contraindications of seclusion and restraint. Regulations specify that providing sound therapeutic practice means that providers shall not deliver any service to an individual without an ISP tailored to that person's needs and preferences. Western State documentation stated that Elizabeth had no contraindications to the use of seclusion or restraint. This is a failure on their part to list her limited mobility, physical disabilities, trauma history, and cognitive impairment as contraindications. This failure was confirmed by the LHRC, which found that Elizabeth had clear and obvious contraindications that should have been included in her ISP. By failing to properly document these contraindications to the use of seclusion and restraint, Western State failed to provide services according to sound therapeutic practice. Next, by limiting accommodations for clients with disabilities. Western State's policy to not allow chairs or other furniture in the seclusion room fails to take into account the specific needs of individuals with physical disabilities and does not allow for proper accommodations. Despite Elizabeth's chronic pain and mobility issues, she was placed into the seclusion room with only her rollator, a device that is not meant for long-term sitting. While the LHRC neglected to find a violation, they did make the recommendation that Western State staff should be trained on identifying pain in individuals' communication difficulties and providing appropriate accommodations. This recommendation makes it clear that the LHRC agrees that sound therapeutic practice includes accommodations for patients with disabilities during the provision of all services, including emergency services. Western State's failure to accommodate Elizabeth's disabilities is a failure to follow sound therapeutic practice and violates the regulations. And lastly, through the improper use of seclusion. The use of seclusion and restraint are part of a provider's emergency response procedures. They establish the standard for sound therapeutic practice of these procedures at the facility. By finding that Western State violated the regulations regarding this use of seclusion, it necessarily follows that Western State failed to provide services that follow sound therapeutic practice and thus violated the regulations. Next, we'll be discussing dignity. First, that Western State's actions constitute neglect. Western State failed to provide the treatment, care, or services necessary to the health and safety of Elizabeth. First, they failed to use proper emergency response when they placed her in seclusion, despite the fact that she was not in immediate danger to self or others, which is a requirement of the regulations and Western State's policy. The LHRC confirmed that Western State failed to provide proper emergency response when they found that Western State improperly used seclusion. Furthermore, they found that this use of seclusion could have been detrimental to her well-being. Western State's failure to use proper emergency response is a failure to follow Western State's policies, a failure to meet clinical standards, and a failure to follow the regulations, and constitutes neglect. And finally, that Western State's action constitute abuse. The definition of abuse in the regulation has two prongs. First, that an act or failure to act was done knowingly, recklessly, or intentionally, and that this act or failure to act caused or might have caused harm, injury, or death. Put it simply, Elizabeth should never have been placed in seclusion. The LHRC agreed, which is why they found that Western State had violated Elizabeth's rights through the improper use of seclusion. Furthermore, the LHRC determined that seclusion could have been detrimental to the client's well-being. Therefore, Western State's use of seclusion, an action they performed knowingly and intentionally that might have caused Elizabeth harm, violates the regulation and constitutes abuse. The LHRC's failure to substantiate abuse is solely based on their conclusion that Western State did not act with malicious intent and that there was no intent to be abusive. But as we detailed earlier, the definition of abuse does not consider intent whatsoever. It only considers whether the provider's act or failure to act was done knowingly, recklessly, or intentionally. Western State's motives are not under scrutiny here. It is their actions. The LHRC already determined that Western State's action of placing Elizabeth into seclusion violated her human rights and had the potential to cause harm. Therefore, their knowing and intentional placement of Elizabeth into seclusion, an action that could have been detrimental to her well-being, constitutes abuse. What happened to Elizabeth were failures on the part of Western State. She had contraindications to the use of seclusion and restraint. Western State did not document them. Elizabeth did not meet the criteria for seclusion, but she was placed in seclusion anyway. She has chronic pain and mobility issues. Western State did not accommodate this while she was in seclusion. All of these actions are a direct conflict with Western State's policies, clinical standards of practice, and the Virginia Code. Such actions were abusive and neglectful and were violations of the regulations. And now Elizabeth's sister would like to say a few things.
Do I just start?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you need to hear me on the microphone, or can you hear me with my speaking voice?
They hear you.
Okay.
We can hear
Okay. So my sister Elizabeth turned 61 this June, but she thinks she's 6 or 12 years old. She loves Pebbles and Bam Bam and Scooby-Doo. But she also hears voices that she can't control, and medications have never totally quieted them. She may scream when the voices are distressing, and she also screams when she's in pain, anxious, or afraid, or overwhelmed by a new environment and noise. She had constant pain at Western State Hospital. In life, she had constant pain. Headaches, tooth pain, arthritis pain in her back and knees, and unrecognized constipation. She can get anxious and irritable if caregivers and nurses don't understand what she's trying to say, and she thinks they're not trying to help her. She might appear threatening when she's in distress, and she walks up to someone wanting their attention. At 250 pounds, big girl, unsteady on her feet without a rollator, and so nearsighted she can't see your face unless she's a foot away from you. She is a limited threat. When people around her are conversing, it can cause her severe anxiety. Fist shaking and table banging are gestures of frustration. I've helped Elizabeth through many crises in the past 30 years. She stomped, screamed and thrown things, but she's never seriously hurt herself or anyone else. She is the one who has been hurt, assaulted in group homes licensed by DBHDF, and abducted from Eastern State Hospital by a former patient. Most recently, she survived a fire that completely burned her group home in North Garden, Virginia. She was alone in her room as smoke poured down the hallway and would have died if a man hadn't broken a door and dragged her on her stomach out before the whole house was engulfed in flames. My sister has always sought acceptance and kindness and to be talked to like a human being. She loves being hugged and teased and singing songs like Amazing Grace with others. She can show kindness and concern for peers and caregivers. I think she made some friends while she was at Western State. To be put in a room and told she had to stay there, unable to lay down or listen to music which calms her, was likely a reminder of past traumas, like being locked in a bathroom at a day program and sexually assaulted by one of her peers in Norfolk, Virginia, if I didn't say that. When she's out shopping and her back hurts, she won't let me put her on the rollator because she's afraid of falling off of it. She doesn't like that small hard seat with no arms or back support. And for her to be on that for an hour, whether it was intended or not, was psychological and physical punishment. On December 9th, her 7th day at Western State, after 3 days in UVA's emergency department.
I think we have time. I think our time is, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, not even 30 seconds?
Yeah, I'm sorry. They're pretty strict on that.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay.
But thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? I'll just remind us that we're looking at information that's already included in the packet for clarification.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, what you're looking for is to overturn the decision of the local Human Rights Committee on 11560 services and 11550 dignity,
Yes.
but not 11570 participation.
No.
Are there any other questions? David or Cora?
I don't have any.
No, I do not at this time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We will move on now to response from Western State. So who is speaking on behalf of Western State today? Yes, I guess you can go up there. Thank you. So when you're ready, we'll start the clock at 10 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Petition appeals the findings and recommendations of the Stanton Area LHRC with regard to dignity and service. Western State was not copied on the 723 appeal by the petitioner as per regulation. Thus, there is a gap in time between the date of the petition and the facility's response. After receiving the appeal from OHR via email on 7/26, Western filed an 8-2 written statement of response. Review of the response packet will assist and inform the SHRC that the founded violations and the recommendations of the LHRC were adequately addressed. Western State agrees with the Stanton Area LHRC findings and recommendations of no violation with regard to the dignity and service sections of the human rights regulations that are presently on appeal. Following is the event description, which supports the LHRC's decision. With regard to the appeal of 115-50 dignity, the facility chose not formally appeal the LHRC findings and recommendations. However, Western firmly disputes the characterization of this event as seclusion. By definition, seclusion means the involuntary placement of an individual alone in her area, secured by a door that is locked or held shut by a staff person, by physically blocking the door, or by any other physical or verbal means, so that the individual cannot leave it. The event in question would have been more accurately described as direct observation in a less stimulating environment. The location was the seclusion restraint suite. However, the door was never closed, locked, nor barred by staff. After hours of de-escalation efforts, this alternative location and level of observation was implemented as the least restrictive measure and in lieu of a true seclusion order and event. The appeal additionally asserts that this client was not engaging in behavior that placed herself or others in immediate harm. Documentation supports that the clinical decision to relocate this client to a more private area of the unit was made after ongoing attempts throughout the day to de-escalate her behaviors. Although technically not a seclusion event and therefore not subject to the prerequisites cited by the petition, The potential for self-harm was present by her banging on the table. Also, her documented ongoing behaviors disrupting the milieu throughout the previous shift and into the next put her at significant potential risk from other clients in an acute behavioral health setting. Therefore, she was directed to an alternate location in the seclusion restraint suite in an effort to decrease stimulation, maintain her safety, and further to be respectful of other clients' continuous environmental stressors. This client was not in seclusion. The door was not closed, not locked, nor was the doorway barred by staff. The implication of the appeal that this client, diagnosed with mild intellectual disability, perceived that she was unable to leave the area is conjecture and is not consistent with our facility practice. MJH was under direct observation by staff at all times during the approximate 75-minute event, after which she regained control of her behavior. She sat on her rollator during this time and was not in danger of harm, as is asserted by the appeal petition. The characterization of the event circumstances as abuse or neglect is unsupported by the facts. The Stanton area LHRC found no violation constituting abuse or neglect. Regarding the appeal of 115-60 service, Western State did not document the event in question per seclusion restraint policy and regulations because there was no seclusion. The occurrence was properly ordered and documented as a direct observation event. Since there was no seclusion, the clinical evaluation and assessment of contraindications as disputed by the appeal is unrelated to the circumstances of this event. However, the facility questions the latitude with which the petition challenges the appropriateness of a decision made by licensed clinical professionals. Western does not believe this medical determination to be within the expertise or purview of the DLCV. Again, this client was relocated in order to decrease stimulation to an area of the unit that is purposely sparsely appointed and by facility policy does not contain potentially dangerous items or structural defects. This area of the unit does not contain furniture for the safety of clients who may be highly agitated or who may be at risk of self-harm. In the case of EJH, an exception was immediately made to allow her to sit on her rollator. Please also reference the DBHDS Departmental Instruction 604, physical requirements for state seclusion rooms. Western State Hospital policy conforms to this departmental policy. Stanton area LHRC found no violation to service. With regard to the complainant's proposed resolution, first, Western is aware, historically has made, and actively continues to make proper and appropriate accommodations for persons with disabilities. Dedication to individual needs is the cornerstone of the facility's mission statement to provide safe and effective individualized treatment in a recovery-focused environment. Additionally, we are committed to promoting an environment of inclusion and equity by honoring our individual differences and rejecting intolerance in any form. Please reference our Western State Internet homepage. In our July 16 response or action plan, we outlined our current care for the developmentally disabled and an intention to increase future collaboration with REACH. The complainant did not appeal the facility action plan, which implies its acceptance. Second, each unit at Western State already has a comfort or sensory room. Third, please also reference the response. The facility is undertaking a comprehensive review of seclusion restraint policy and practices. The Seclusion Restraint Committee has been tasked with this project that will include staff education and training, de-escalation skills, staff and patient safety, policy review, and consultation with peer facilities. Lastly, to more accurately reflect the intent of behavioral de-escalation when it may be indicated and facilitated using a safe, less stimulating physical environment, Western State is actively pursuing the renaming of the Seclusion Restraint Suite to the Recovery Suite. We recognize that the current name invites confusion to arise in terms of appropriate documentation when this space is utilized for purposes other than seclusion or restraint. Further, we believe that renaming this space aligns more closely with our hospital mission of providing recovery-focused treatment and serves to reinforce the use of all possible de-escalation tools before resorting to the use of seclusion or restraint. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Western State from the committee?
I'm Tim. In doing so, I've never heard the term open seclusion. Is that something that's unique to Western State, or is that something that's I haven't come across it and was kind of curious where that came about? Was it just in the notes that someone put, or because I heard you talk about direct observation? Is that just a different term for direct observation?
Open seclusion was a term that came into use at Western State when the client was relocated to a less stimulating area of the unit. It's not seclusion, the door's not shut, the door's not barred, not locked. And it refers to the location. So it really is direct observation in that particular location. But as I said, in recognizing that we can have possibly unclear documentation, we've decided to change the name of that area.
Thank you.
I have a question. I just wanted to ask, similar to that, was that open observation in that space, was that established specifically with this incident, or have you all used that space in a similar fashion prior to this incident?
Not with this client.
Okay, but so you have used it in a similar way prior to this incident happening?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. And then also, if you had, is there another space that is similar that is used for seclusion, or is this your only seclusion space in that area of the facility?
Each unit has a designated space.
Okay, all right. So there's not two spaces, it's just one?
There's a suite.
Okay.
That has more than one room.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Cora or David, do you have any questions for Western State?
Yes, I have a question. A couple, actually. How did that individual get to that room? Or what you call a space?
Would have been escorted by staff to that room.
Okay, physically escorted or just kind of like suggested of that?
He would have been asked to walk down there. I don't want to tell you something wrong. Dr. Stout, if you have access to the record, maybe you could look that up real quick. I'm
sorry, our internet is down. I can't access that right now, Gail.
Okay.
I need to tell you a little bit about. Okay, I need to tell you a little bit about my background. Is the reason I asked those specific questions because I worked at Southern Virginia Mental Health Institute, and I worked at other facilities with seclusion and restraint. So I'm pretty knowledgeable about how that's used. And so that's why it came up to me is if the person was escorted physically or just kind of asked to go there makes a difference to me. The second thing is that, was there documentation that this alternative form of whether it's called open seclusion or quiet area, was that documented at the time?
Yes, it was documented.
Okay. And the other interesting thing, just to note about the notes is that on one hand you say that in that room there's nothing allowed, but you allow her to have the the kind of like the rolling chair or the kind of walker. But at the same time, he said those things aren't allowed in that room. It just kind of knowingly, a patient would know that that's the seclusion room. I'm just pointing that out. So those are just kind of my things. And then that other statement kind of just bothers me about where you said it's clearly outside the expertise and purview. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter about any clinical decisions always reviewed by other people, whether the clinicians or not, but I'm just making those observations. It helped me decide a little bit more if it was actually seclusion, determining about how the person got there. And I understand what you're saying, that the door was open, but those are just thoughts of mine. I was just asking for clarification.
Thank you, David. Cora, do you have any questions?
No.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the room regarding this? I want to let you know that you'll receive a written response from the committee within 20 working days after we review and discuss it later on today. Thank you very much for your time. Because we're already in open session, there's no need to move in and out of that. So we appreciate your time today, and you'll be hearing from us within 20 days, 20 working days. Okay. Okay. So the committee will be moving to closed session for deliberation.
Open part that other people can hear comes at what time or agenda? 11:45. We have to express intent to be physically.
No.
And it may not be 11:45, we're a little bit late.
No, okay, no,
It's already 11:40, yeah. But on the agenda. I keep looking at that. I also look at that. But we do have the link, correct? Yes. Okay. You have the link. So you're going to go
So may I have a motion, please, to move us into closed session for deliberation?
I so move. This is David.
Thank you, David. May I have a second? Thank you, Megan. Monica, would you please read us into closed session? And we're moving into closed session now.